We are the Hollywood Paranormal Detectives.
Keeping it squatchy tonight, everybody. Welcome to HPD Live. It is 8 o'clock on a Tuesday, not a Wednesday, because we are making an exception for our very special guest tonight. I know we call ourselves paranormal investigators, not just ghost hunters, because we are into all aspects of the paranormal, not just ghosts, not just aliens, but everything. And before I bring my guest up, I'm going to bring up my partner in crime. Here's Mr. Brian Ray.
Hey, all.
Brian, the legend of Boggy Creek.
Oh, I can almost sing you a song. But
I know. I have so many memories, and we'll get to it. Let's bring her in, our resident psychic medium, Miss Mandy Maisie.
Hello.
Mandy, you know the legend of Boggy Creek.
Oh my God, my favorite.
How many times have you seen it? Wait a minute. All right.
I know,
just for that, Mandy, I'm going to bring in a specialist just to scold you. Just kidding. He is an author. He is a musician. And in the world of cryptids, he is the man, Mr. Lyle Blackburn.
Hey, everybody.
We're not worthy. We're not worthy to howl. Ooh, ooh.
Thank you so much for joining us.
I appreciate you. I'll pay you for that.
It was part of the contract, as I had to bow. Man, you are a hardworking. This has been an argument with me and Brian for years. Not an argument. Is it cryptids or cryptoids?
Cryptids.
Cryptids. Okay.
Yes, and thank you for asking that. I'm frequently on shows that are asking me about cryptoids, and I'm like, "What's a cryptoid?"
What the fuck is that?
I mean, your books are amazing, letting us know that the Legend of Boggy Creek is more than this movie. That there was tales before and tales after. Your Lizard Man book, I have not read it, but I'm going to order it. The fact that you don't just stay with one place is so impressive. And you have time to be a musician, which is pretty amazing.
Bad Boom's not here. Sorry.
I know. Our old member was a drummer that had played with Black Sabbath and like kind of a legendary LA rocker. So let's just get down to like, how did it start for you? Like, what was the first thing that opened your eyes to the world of the unexplained? Was it the Legend of Boggy Creek, or was it something before that?
It was something before that. In elementary school, I want to say around third grade, you could order scholastic books out of a catalog, and there was one called Strange But True, and that's how cool. And it had stories of Bigfoot, Yeti, and the Loch Ness Monster, as well as some other just really freaky, classic paranormal type tales in there. And that really just, cemented it for me, because as far back as I can remember, I was into horror movies. I loved anything, early on, Frankenstein films or whatever was on Saturday Night TV, Dark Shadows, which was a daytime television show. So I loved all horror movies, but when I saw, something like Loch Ness Monster or Bigfoot, I'm thinking, hey, this is like a monster, but I could actually see that. And my father was a bow hunter, so we had already spent a lot of times in woods. We drove through all these really creepy small towns. And, I just kind of liked that environment. It kind of freaked me out a little bit. But I thought it was safe because Loch Ness Monster was in Scotland. Bigfoot was in the Pacific Northwest. I'm from Fort Worth, Texas. I live in Texas, and I was safe until I saw The Legend of Boggy Creek in a drive-in when I was super young. I mean, it's amazing I can remember that, but I do. And that dramatized sightings of a Sasquatch-like creature in southern Arkansas, only about 3 hours from where I lived in Texas. So then I was like, oh no, this movie here can be real. And that movie was kind of a docudrama horror film, which was kind of the template for cryptid TV to come. And
so for someone who's never seen it like Mandy, how would you describe it to her?
Well, it it's it's very 1970s. There was kind of the nature films and documentaries, and there was sort of those independent sort of type horror films that were just starting to come along. And so it's a bit of that. The thing is it uses real people. And in many cases, the people who had actually reported seeing this creature called the Fouke Monster or Boggy Creek Monster after the movie, to reenact it. So it's like kind of what you see on a lot of these shows now where they do the reenactments and all that. But these looked super real. And these were Southern Arkansas people. And if they said they saw an ape-like creature in the woods, it was just such a scary movie. And people were screaming and running out of the theater. And
oh my gosh.
Saw it. Kind of like the Blair Witch Project of its time. That's kind of a good way to put it. Where Blair Witch seems so real, did this person disappear? Is this going on? It was like that, but just like a Bigfoot gone wild movie, basically.
That's wild.
Now, Brian, let's let you shine. When was the first time you saw it, Brian?
If memory serves, when I was very young, I saw it at the drive-in.
Oh, great.
I was a kid. I would get dragged to a lot of things that most young kids wouldn't get taken to because I had two older siblings. So my mother would just take us to see just about anything. And we went and saw Boggy Creek, and I was afraid of an outhouse for the rest of my life.
I remember it was middle school for me. I slept over at a buddy's house, and he goes, "We have an illegal Bigfoot tape. It's not allowed to watch it. It's real." And I remember just like watching it, like, oh my gosh, like this is so real. And I believed it was real till probably high school, or until I saw it again on USA Up All Night, and was like, wait a minute, that's a suit. But I believed it for so long, and it made me believe in Bigfoot. Have you ever had a personal Fouke Monster experience? Because you live so close.
Yeah, several. I mean, I've been up there many times over the years, and and just to sort of preface that, the movie had a huge effect on me. Obviously, I loved horror films. I loved outdoors hunting and creepy small towns, and
everything in the
world. Had it everything. So later on in life, I kept remembering back to that movie. I'm like, I want to know what was real, because it says a true story. So, as an adult, and I started getting into this kind of research, I thought, I want to know exactly what was real, or how this all happened, how that movie was even made, because it made millions of dollars in the 70s. And it was apparently illegal, it was all these rumors. So when I started going up there, meeting people, interviewing people, talking to people who were literally either in the movie, whose parents were in the movie, and took me to locations, then I started doing not only just interviews in an investigative journalist way to write the book and such, but I went out into the bayous and the Sulphur River bottoms around Boggy Creek. And so over the years, that's my favorite place to go, which is spooky and all that. There's been strange things that have happened. One of the spookier instances was in 2015. Myself and a guy who went with me a lot on these trips, we went down to the area of Mercer Bayou. And if you remember the movie, you remember the old hermit that lived out there in the woods? This is really close to where he lived, and it's still creepy and remote. And it was around midnight, and we took a canoe up that bayou channel. And, there's alligators in there, and there's cypress trees with the moss and everything. And we were just, it's nice to go paddling at night. And we were kind of up there, and we hear this howl. Something, it's maybe 75 yards away, just comes up over the trees. And when you're paddling, it's kind of noisy because there's ambient noise of the insects and the frogs. Yeah. So we kind of stopped and listened, like, what was that? Was that a coyote? And he's like, I don't think so. So then about 45 seconds later, it does it again. And so now we can hear, that ain't no coyote. I don't know what that is. It's not a bird. It's not a familiar noise. Foxes make weird noises, cougars, all that kind of stuff. None of that. It sounded more like big and a growl to a howl.
A big
Holy
set of lungs.
shit.
Yeah. About a minute later, it did it again. And, by now, the hair on the back of our necks is standing up. We're like, dude, that could be the foul monster. We're in. And then you're like, what are we doing out here? It's dark. We don't even really have any lights. It's midnight. Nobody knows where we are. Well, it didn't howl again. So finally we kind of started talking and paddling and went back and dodged the alligators and went back to where we were camped a little bit down in the bayou. And about the time we pulled the canoe up, got out, pulled it up on this, there's not that many high spots, but this is one of those high spots, sort of like where the hermit lived. And I got up on that hill, and all of a sudden I hear that howl again. But this time it was right across the bayou channel from where we pulled the canoe out. And so, of course we were caught off guard, but I grabbed a light and I just ran down that hill trying to see whatever it was. I didn't care if it killed me or whatever. I was going to see this thing. And, he's grabbing an audio recorder and so I ran down there and whatever this thing was took off through the woods fast enough that it howled again. And by now was, 30 yards away, at least from where I was standing, and then moved further and was probably 100 yards away and howled again, just this scary, spooky howl.
Did the howl change, like to try to intimidate you, you think?
It was almost the same every time. It didn't necessarily sound threatening. It just gave that howl that it howls.
Oh.
Now, I didn't see whatever it was. I can't 100% sure, but this is an area where there's been numerous sightings. I've interviewed people. I've got friends even that live in the Fouke area that have had experiences down there. And later I did possibly see the creature. But that was really spooky, obviously, because we figured, did this thing follow us down the waterway and all that. So
now,
What?
have you met Charles Pierce, the director of the movie?
No, I didn't. About the time I started working on that, he passed away.
Okay.
So I do know his oldest daughter very well, and she and I have worked together. We did the work together to remaster the film and to, I found the original artwork, the poster, which was painted by Ralph McQuarrie, who's famous for creating the Star Wars characters for George Lucas, but he painted the original poster. I found that. We rounded up all this stuff. We found the original prints. But unfortunately, I was never able to meet Smokey Crabtree. Charles Pierce, but I did know Smokey Crabtree, who was in the movie.
Oh wow! I'm just so excited. I can't think. So what was your intention always to write a book, or were you just sort of like wanting to find out as much as you could about the real side of that movie? And when did it start to become like, this is a story that has to be told too?
Well, I think it was both at the same time, because I remember, now I hadn't seen the movie for years, and when I was touring with my band Ghoultown, one time I went in a truck stop and they had the DVD, and I'm freaking out. I'm like, what? It was like you. It's like, what is this movie? And I'm like, Legend of Boggy Creek, dude. And I sat in the van like every night. They were in there partying before the show. I would just be in the van watching the movie.
Yeah.
And so now I'm watching it as an adult, and it still had that nostalgia. But that's when I started thinking, I want to know more. So really, it did start once I decided I wanted to know more. It kind of started with the idea to write a book, because I was already writing for the horror magazine Rue Morgue and doing cryptid kind of film meets real life cases for that magazine. And then I thought, well, I should write a book. What would I write a book about? Legend of Boggy Creek. And that's when I started going up there and immersing myself literally into the legend.
Brian, Mandy, do you guys have any questions?
I'm just still like,
I'm so excited.
I can't believe that you ran after this thing in the dark, not knowing what, like, that's bravery. I'd be scared shitless.
Yeah, I don't know. It's it's just one of those things where, I mean, I grew up in the woods. My dad, he's old school. He doesn't know what a compass is or a GPS or nothing. He just went in the woods with a bow and a knife, and I guess I was just used to crazy situations, and and with this research, I don't know. You only got one life and one chance to see it. What the heck, I mean, if alligators swim by my boat, I ain't hanging out trying to pet them or nothing. But creature, on the other hand, I might try to run up and, I don't know, hug it.
I mean, I guess we do the same thing, right? With spirits in the dark, we run after the things that scare us because we're intrigued. So it makes sense that you would do that.
I always say my legs get Terminator and my upper body is Shaggy and Scooby. So I'm like, but I'm running towards it at the same time.
Yeah, because if you think about it, just even what you guys do, or going into old creepy abandoned houses, and there's a certain amount of people that just are not going to do that.
Yeah.
Same with the woods. I love spooky houses, and I love spooky woods, so it's all home to me.
I grew up in Michigan, and there was never any shortage of Bigfoot stories coming down from up north. I was in the Detroit area, but between northern Michigan and the Upper Peninsula, there were constantly stories of large, hairy man-like creatures, ape-like man creatures.
Large, hairy man creatures.
I was always fascinated. I remember another. Do you remember another film from the 70s? There was a company. It was actually Schick, the razor company. Somehow got involved with Sun Classics Films, and they produced a series of paranormal and supernatural movies. One of which was called Mysterious Monsters, hosted by Peter Graves. It's basically a hour and a half long Bigfoot documentary that is just, I mean, it's super 70s, very dated, but it's one of my favorite things of all time.
Yeah, I love that movie. Yeah, that's another one I just love. I don't know. I like that 70s vibe and the Bigfoot of the 70s, and I watch that sometimes.
There's a sequence where they're, in a house being terrorized by a Bigfoot outside, and they open the door and Bigfoot's staying there, and then it cuts away, and the narrator just says, "What followed was a violent act."
Yeah, that's one of the best scenes, and it was so Legend of Boggy Creek. It was at the house. Like it was, scary Bigfoot.
When you went to Falk as the investigator, were there any of the stories that you unturned as being, oh, this one was a hoax, or were there any people that were trying to not assist you in bringing the Boggy Creek story to more light?
Well, when I went there, this is a very small rural town, and like any small rural town, if you show up there and they're not rolling out the red carpet necessarily, it took me a few times to gain some of their trust. And I met a guy who has a museum in Miller County, and talked to him, told him what I'm doing. I said, some of the citizens there are very hesitant because they didn't have such a great experience, because the movie was so big and stuff. All these people were coming down there, yahoos with 6-packs and shotguns. We're going to get the monster. Overrunning stuff. It was a huge problem. And a lot of people, made fun of them and said it was a hoax. And these people are like, it isn't. We got reputable people here who have seen something we can't explain. And so I had to convince them. It's kind of, the movie had just faded out from memory. And this was right before I had appeared on shows like Monsters and Mysteries in America and Finding Bigfoot, when they did Boggy Creek segments. So it really kind of hadn't come back into vogue. So they opened up and started talking to me. And I found that, people would say, oh, this was a hoax because of this, it was a circus train that wrecked, or just these ridiculous things. But the individual accounts, as I interviewed people or talked to people, I found that pretty much everything in that movie is just what people had said. And Pierce was very accurate, more accurate than he probably had to be to reenact exactly what happened in those cases. So it was really,
So it is true, essentially.
Oh, it's completely true. And whether the creature exists or doesn't, this is what happened. And people saw something that we simply can't explain even to this day. And people think, that can't exist, or Bigfoot or whatever. But if you get dropped out into that place like I was describing, you just look and there's miles and miles of just rugged hardwood bottomland habitat with dirty brackish water, alligators, hogs, and just tons of places for something to live remotely. So, to me, it's like, well, there could be something out here. No problem.
I mean, would you compare it to a Bigfoot, or do you think it's its own kind of swamp creature?
Well, I think it generally could be, defined as a Bigfoot because, like you were saying, Michigan, there's tales of Bigfoot. There's skunk apes in Florida. There's all this. You try to make differentiations between, this one's a little taller, this one's a little shaggier, but really most of the accounts are just quick and fleeting, and it was big and hairy, and it walked on two legs, and it looked kind of like an ape, kind of like a man. So it's hard to say whether it's, the same as a Pacific Northwest Bigfoot, or if it's something different. But I don't think, it's miraculous enough if we have 2 or 3 variations of this, much less, every state has its own, thing.
But so like in 66, when the Mothman happened in Point Pleasant, it seemed to be sort of the same situation where it was a huge moment and the world kind of went to that place like tourists. And there seems to be kind of a lot of parallels into the small town, the Falk monster. What do you think about the Mothman? Do you think it is more of a Bigfoot, or do you think it is one of those unique cryptids?
Well, it's definitely not a Bigfoot, and you're right. That case, there's these sort of seminal cases that, in 1966 and 67, when some really solid witnesses saw something that they couldn't quite explain. And the description here is something as big as a man with wings. It could fly. People then would try to explain it as was a sandhill crane, or it was this or that, but that didn't really fit what the witnesses described. So that was harder to explain because you can kind of say, well, Bigfoot, biologically could make some sense. A flying humanoid, however, we're starting to get into other realms of the paranormal, which is almost why Mothman is a bigger deal, because it crosses over into other aspects of the paranormal, not just cryptid. But, there's Men in Black, there was UFO activities, all this weird stuff, and Mothman was, said to be there at the collapse of the bridge in December of 67, when, as a harbinger of an omen of death or whatever.
Yeah.
But I've been to Point Pleasant and been there where those original sightings were, and like the Boggy Creek area, there is just something weird about it. It is spooky. It's just like no other place. I don't even know how to describe it, but it's a spooky area.
It has a similar vibe then to the Boggy Creek.
Yeah. And of course I can't say for sure. I know all these stories in my head, and then I'm there, but I try to be neutral and say, well, is there something different about this place than just say any patch of woods? And I've been in a lot of patches of woods all over the country, and I will say that I think that those places, there's more to it than just simply there's the creature. There's just something strange about those areas.
It sounds like talking to ghost hunters and being like, there's something about the Queen Mary and the Stanley Hotel that have that same feeling,
Yeah.
of time travel. Those two locations, I think, particularly, you feel like you go through the door and you go back 80 years.
Yeah.
Being a fan of all things paranormal, have you ever experienced a ghost sighting?
I've actually seen a ghost. Yes.
Good.
It surprises people because I'm a monster hunter, but I just love the whole monster hunting thing. But I first started, my interest was ghosts pretty much. And, as a kid, I watched the show In Search Of on television and documentaries and read books. And when I was a senior in high school, I had a friend who I played in a band with, and he lived in a house nearby. And for some time, he had said, "Well, we have this ghost in the house. I've seen it. My parents have seen it, and even some of my other friends said they had seen it." And I was like, I wasn't in the investigator mode then, so I wasn't,
But it does change your mindset. Like if you go to a friend's house and they go, "Oh yeah, it's haunted," you go, "Oh shit."
Yeah, it's sort of there in the back of your mind. And I thought, that's cool. But one evening we were sitting there, it was about 10 p.m., and we were going to go out somewhere. And I was waiting on him, and I was sitting on his fireplace, kind of looking at the TV, and the entryway was right here. And as I'm looking this way, out of my peripheral vision, I catch something moving. And so I turn and look, and I see the figure. And it's almost like a classic, what you think a ghost would look like. It was this whitish figure, looked about the size of a kid, maybe 12 years old, walked across from this other room, across that hallway, and then towards the bedroom. It was only a couple of seconds, but I turned and I saw it. And I was like, dude, I said, I just saw the ghost. I said, he goes, he was all, "Oh yeah, we see it all the time there." He's real nonchalant about it, like it's no big deal. Freaking out. But yeah, I was like, and I kind of tried to debunk it. I'm like, well, maybe it was a reflection, or the cars don't pass this way on the street. There was a curtain there. There's no lights coming in. There was just simply no explanation. And they said his theory was that it was a kid who had, I suppose, supposedly lived in the house before, or some such thing. So yeah, just like my friends, I saw that thing as well.
Brian, that reminds me of the Pasadena Playhouse ghost. I described it as made of shiny mashed potatoes. It was a figure that was it looked like mashed potatoes, and it looked solid though. You know what I mean?
You described it at the time as like a balloon poked its head around the corner. That's
a balloon filled with mashed potatoes. I think. So it had a shininess like a balloon, but it was, and that thing looked out the door at me and looked back. Like, it didn't peek out. It looked out the door at me and looked back. Like, well, I mean, Lyle, you have a podcast also that you're just starting, right? Monstro Bizarro.
Yes, yeah. People have asked me about this for years, and I write the books, and I've narrated about 8 movies with small town monsters, which we've covered a lot of these small town monster cases. So it's my voice over the narration, and finally I thought, it would be nice to be in that space, and I took the Monstro Bizarro comes from the name of my column, which used to run in Rue Morgue Horror Magazine. And I've just launched that.
I listened to it today. It was great.
Oh, thank you. I try to be different. There's a lot of talk shows, so I try to do something different. And the next episode launches Friday the 13th.
Oh, good.
Very cool.
Yeah, you have a great on this. It's a very good voice. Like that changes a podcast. Is the voice, and I was like, oh my gosh, and we got him on our show tonight. Like, it's a great, the Lake Worth monster, and you go into the parallels of all the other creatures, and and the Goatman Bridge and talk about that story a little. Oh, it's a good listen for anybody out there. So have you thought about just derailing the way we were talking about ghosts? Have you thought about paranormal investigation?
Well, I mean, a few times people have invited me, or I've been able to do it, but I'm just so busy that there's just no more time in the day to even, between books and podcasts, music, the films and occasional TV shows. It's just like, man, if it just rolls around on a Friday night and I just happen to be somewhere and somebody's going ghost hunting, I'm down. But there's no way I could, just fit that in, I guess.
Well, if we find ourselves in Texas, we might try to drag you along with us.
Yeah, see, and that way, you guys know where you're going. You got a plan. I can just follow along. I don't have to do the planning, or those are fun. That's like a night off, even though you'll be doing it, because there's really never any time off. It doesn't matter where I go. I can think, I got to go over here, and this is where some such creature was seen. I got to, my girlfriend's always like, where are we going? I got to take a picture. This goat man was seen over there. She's like, what? Trust me, it's a business. We're going to write this off as business.
But when a cryptoid is seen, people want your opinion, right?
That's right. I got to be knowledgeable, and like, again, when we talk about the Mothman, well, I've been there, and these podcasts, most of the subjects on my podcast, it's not just me telling the story. It's like I've been into that swamp or been in that location, which helps, to get a good perspective. You
can tell listening that you're not reading it. You know the story, and you're telling the story.
Right. And that's one thing I think I offer, especially with my books, because in a book you can be so much more detailed and document everything. And so the podcast follows that format where I can expand these stories. You can see stuff on this on YouTube or whatever, but I've been down there for years. I knew people that were there in 1969 and things like that. So I try to add extra stuff and things that maybe were previously unpublished.
And you definitely did. That's exactly what I got from the podcast. That if you mention something as a reference, you explain the reference, which helped as a listener. Fantastic. So let's say someone calls you and go, I've just seen a creature in Louisville. What are your steps towards, well, let me go to this location. Let me see if I can find proof of what they've seen. Do you have specific techniques or equipment you take, or how would you approach a new sighting?
Well, it depends on the context of the sighting, because obviously there's a lot of reports of stuff, and a lot of times for me, it's like sort of focusing a light. Okay, I'm going to look into the Missouri monster, Momo, or whatever, and then I really start feeling out in those places and try to go into depth on research. At the same time, I'm getting these sort of one-off random things. Yeah. Some of those I can follow up on, some of them I can't. Obviously, there's no benefactor here that's paying the flight to go to Louisville tomorrow to check out the Bigfoot, But if what I do is usually we follow up with a witness, interview them by the phone, file that away, and if I can't get there at that time, then it may pop up later where, hey, remember that sighting or whatever.
Oh, it's still happening, kind of thing.
Yeah, and if it's something really recent and within driving distance, then the method would be to go interview that person if I can in person, go to the location of the sighting, get a sense of whether this is we're not out back of a Home Depot, we're down in some woods where something elusive could be living. And when you meet people, you get a good sense of their credibility and all that sort of stuff, as you know. witnesses. And then as far as, I'm not a real tech kind of guy with running out there with all this bells and whistles necessarily. I mean, because at the end of the day, if you got a good picture, that'd be as good as anything. I have a lot of howls and all this other stuff, but what does it really say?
Yeah.
So, it just depends on the context and where the sighting was and whether I think it's worth investing the time to really go out there and to follow up, because there's just, with the internet, there's just stuff being reported constantly.
Yeah.
Oh, I can imagine.
Well, like, going along with that, what is the weirdest, unique, one-off cryptid you've ever been told about?
Let me think. There's been a few bizarre ones. I remember one from, I don't even know if it's a cryptid. It was somebody who was telling me that this was in upper state New York, and they were hiking down sort of a game trail, and they saw something come across the trail, and they said it looked kind of like a triangle, and it was, like the Predator movie, what the special effect they used where it was sort of like blurry but kind of blended in. He said it was like that, and this thing came across the trail, and I'm like, all right, it's kind of like a ghost meets a cryptid meets a extraterrestrial. I don't know what that was, but I just remember that one as being completely off the grid, unexplainable. And then you get other ones, I was just talking to a guy who had a sighting of a kind of a lizard man / upright alligator thing that walked on two legs down on the Brazos River, which kind of cuts through the middle of Texas. And this came because it was a newspaper article in Central Texas about me doing the podcast, because I had been down in this little town digging around trying to find these witnesses. And so the newspaper, that's big news, I guess, it was in there. And then this guy contacted me. But he said he was fishing late one evening down on the Brazos River, and his buddy heard this splashing, like something walking. So they're like, who's out here walking around? They looked up, and they said this thing was coming at him. It was like a reptilian looking thing, somewhat like between a man and an alligator, and it was walking up towards them. And he said, we just started that boat and just hooked back up the river, and just,
oh my God.
he said, and this guy was just good old country boy. I mean, I didn't have any reason to doubt what he was telling me. And he said, we didn't look at it long. It scared us so bad. We don't know what it was. We just got out of there.
Wow.
I got chills. That's so creepy.
Very.
We had a question, Mandy. Do you think you could use psychic medium abilities to talk to Bigfoots?
Yes, but I don't think just anyone can do it.
You would have to know the Bigfoot personally.
No, not necessarily. Okay, so I don't know if I can explain this right, but for some reason, and everyone can disagree, Bigfoot feels like almost like not even, it's like a cross between spirit and extraterrestrial. And I feel like if you were to communicate with Bigfoot, it would actually be telepathically. And so I don't think anyone can actually do that except for whoever's been designated to communicate with Bigfoot. I don't know. I personally haven't done it, but I don't see why you couldn't, but I think it's telepathic.
I mean, there are people who claim they have spoken to these creatures telepathically, and there's a good 4 or 5. I guess they fall into the Bigfoot researcher realm, but they're sort of obviously the exception. But they do claim that they can communicate, and I've had, I don't know, a handful of witnesses, just people, tell me that they were either communicating or they felt that the creature was trying to give them a message.
Give them something. Yeah.
A lot like a alien abductee that gets that message of "I'm not going to hurt you, I'm not going to hurt you" kind of thing.
Well, the Yeti has always been, and its lore is more of a psychic being, something that can pass on messages.
I mean,
telepathically.
yeah, I agree. And that I'm going to be honest, I don't know too much about Bigfoots and cryptids. I mean, I'm much more like paranormal and extraterrestrials are like my jam, but I believe anything is possible for sure. But yeah, Bigfoot feels very much extraterrestrial to me. And that's why I feel like not everyone is just going to have a conversation with Bigfoot. I think only certain people are going to be able to tap into that and hear the message coming through, like some of the people that you've mentioned. So I don't know. It's fascinating though.
Right. And I mean, even at a more base level, you get some witnesses who say they felt like an overwhelming sense of fear or foreboding or this sort of like a subwoofer kind of vibe, like something that was like infrasound almost, like describing something as if these creatures, could put off some sort of a subconscious or low frequency or things like that, which I mean, even animals can do amazing things. So you can't say.
Oh, yeah.
Is that people experience leading up to an encounter or during an encounter?
It could be both. Sometimes they say that, then they never actually see the creature, and they've speculated that for whatever reasons in that circumstance that there was a creature there, and then sometimes. Yes, that would be as they saw the creature, I suppose, that they got that feeling and then it just disappeared into the woods.
Wow.
And they were freaked out, obviously.
I mean, that's interesting though, because when I've made contact with extraterrestrials, there is a very distinct feeling, at least for me personally, that I get when I'm near or I'm making contact with one. It's hard to explain, but it is like an overall full body. It's a very different feeling. So it's interesting to hear that people who've encountered Bigfoot have also had like a very distinct, specific type of feeling. I feel like it's all interconnected somehow.
So you're saying there's a vibe that know the connection's real. That once it's clicked, this is really happening like this.
But I mean, I only know that from the work that I've done, right? I just like, if you're just new to this, I don't think you would really. I could see how that could be misconstrued as fear because you don't know what's happening, right? But I don't know. It's interesting.
And to me, I'm not a person that I don't have those specialties or any of that. So I don't know a lot about it other than. Well, I think that it might depend on the person. Like if X person encounters Bigfoot, it's very much like I saw some strange thing in the wood. If Y person meets Bigfoot, if that person has more of your type feelings or abilities or whatever, they may then have a different experience and feel more or get more. That's kind of what I see. It's sort of the person, rather than there's a whole bunch of different creatures that can do a whole bunch of different things. It depends on the encounter and the person encountering the creature as to possibly what level of encounter that is, whether it's just a sighting or the feeling or any of that other stuff that could get reported.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of like weird, on top of Bigfoot, there's a lot of weird things like that Bigfoot teleport or that Bigfoot slip between dimensions.
Wait, Bigfoot teleport? What?
Well, they say Bigfoot.
Stories, yes.
Yeah, I've heard stories where there'll be one right in front of somebody and then they're just gone and then they'll hear them running far away, so they teleport.
Oh, that's crazy.
And I've heard when I was on the Queen Mary on the Nick Groff tour and Bobo was there, I remember asking him if he ever had a paranormal experience, and he said he was tracking a Squatch when he was pretty young. And he was tracking a Squatch when he was pretty young, and he felt like he was getting close to one, and then he came around a bluff, and there's this huge like blue orb, and he said it wasn't what he expected. He was knocking back and forth with a Squatch, he thought, and he saw this big orb, and he just ran in fear, which may have been like our Bigfoot's connected to some sort of energy or interdimensional. Lyle, have you heard those kind of stories from people?
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly familiar with all of that. And I mean, to me, 99 out of 100 people I interview, they don't suspect any supernatural powers or shifting between dimensions. It's just simply, I saw this
Flesh and blood creature,
which seemed flesh and blood. But what I've seen over the years is originally in the 70s, Bigfoot was very much connected to other paranormal phenomenons, even UFO, because at that time it was just all one grab bag and there wasn't a lot of Bigfoot researchers. So in some cases, UFO researchers would go and look into it. It was a very blurred situation. But since then, it's been more like there's, the Bigfoot camp that says it's a flesh and blood creature, and that's just simply what it is. In the last 5 or 6 years, I've seen a shift towards more a paranormal thinking, if you will, and looking into it's interdimensional, or occasionally people ask if it's an alien and all that. To me, this is what happens when you have a phenomenon that we've been actively looking into for more than 50 years. We still don't have a specimen. We don't have an explanation for it. And therefore, there begins to be all kinds of theories. And that's natural, because how do we explain this? And like Bobo's situation, how do you explain that?
Yeah.
And these extremes, it doesn't mean that we can prove any of those any more than we can say it's flesh and blood. But these are things that are thrown about as just like, hey, let's try to make this make sense, I guess.
Yeah.
So you said you're not techie and don't have a lot of equipment or anything, but I'm curious. It seems to me that a thermal imaging camera would be like the perfect tool. Do you have one of those?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I've got a couple of FLIRs, which are great. Yeah, those are, definitely.
Assuming that they're a warm mammal species of some kind, that seems like a way you would see if they were hiding in the brush or something.
Right. Yeah, that's an excellent way. And most of the technology, it's it can be cumbersome. Like if you got to have that thing on. It's got to be powered up. The battery's got to be ready. It's all this stuff involved, and then be at the right place at the right time. But if you can make those things align, and I've got several buddies who have gotten some thermal, images that could be one of these creatures and so forth. So those are certainly
cool
advantages we have now technologically. And people say, well, we got all this, everybody's got cell phones. How come you can't take a picture? Well, it's not that easy. Unexpected quick sighting would last 2 or 3 seconds. You're not, unless you got the phone out ready to take the photo, it's much harder. And a lot of these sightings are ones across the road. People say, well, we got all these game cameras in the woods, that they should be on game cameras. And not only are there some kind of weird, unexplainable game camera pictures, but they could possibly avoid these. And I'm pretty sure they do, because
they're not stupid.
if you put a something made out of a petroleum product with plastic and probably things that they can hear in those circuitry. Stick that in the middle of the woods, they can sense that a mile off, and they can avoid it. And in fact, there was a study done several years ago that proved that alpha male coyotes could detect the cameras and would actively avoid them.
Wow.
Now, if a coyote can do that, you would say conceivably Bigfoot would be more intelligent and even more wary, and there's even less of them. They could easily avoid these cameras. So just because we don't have a picture on the camera doesn't mean they don't exist.
Yeah.
That's also people always say, well, how come there's no good photos of UFOs? There's plenty of good photos of UFOs.
It's just that you have a photo that's not the same as having the UFO or having the specimen of Bigfoot, because the photo still, it's probable, but there's no way to prove that what's in the photo.
I mean, if you've been to the Pacific Northwest, you know how it's miles and miles and miles of trees with less than a foot between them, and as far as you can see. And I don't remember what show or what podcast they were talking to a scientist that was an ape specialist, and I remember they said, if I released a family of gorillas into the Pacific Northwest, I would never find evidence of them again, because they live so remotely and they are very intelligent and very nervous. So just a normal family of gorillas, we would never find them. And I always thought that was kind of compelling, that even if it was just gorillas, that they're that smart.
Yeah, you're totally right. I mean, and people don't understand. If you go out there in the Pacific Northwest and just wander off into those woods, you quickly realize there's a million places for these things to be. And, once, a family, 6 gorillas or whatever, you let them in there, good luck finding them.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. People say, well, where's the bodies and the bones and this other stuff? Well, I've been hunting all my life. My dad's been hunting. We've never found a dead bear in the woods. And there are bears in our area in Texas. And, I've seen a few pictures and occasionally a footprint. But if you use the ratio of the number of bears to what could exist for Bigfoot, for example, in the Pacific Northwest, there can be 30,000 bears living up there. You're still rarely going to run across bones of a bear, if ever. There could literally be a group of 300 Sasquatch living in the same area.
Wow.
Now, if you don't run across bones where there's 30,000 bears, what do you think your chances are of coming across one of those 300 Bigfoots, who probably live a pretty long lifespan, who may actively try to be elusive and try to hide their dead? Your chances of finding bones are almost nothing.
Have you ever heard of a story of someone finding a large group or seeing a mass of Bigfoots?
I've heard sightings that had about 3 individuals.
Okay.
One guy said he saw a dozen of them walking in.
Wow.
But he said he saw them walking in 4x4 mode, a dozen in the middle of the day. I said, I think that's what you call black cows. I mean, I don't know. I didn't think that was credible. But short of that, usually it's usually the one individual, sometimes 2, but there's been a few times like somebody said they saw 3 at once, which is.
When you said that, I just imagined, a colony just to find a just civilization. So what do you think of all this time? What is our strongest piece of evidence? Is it the Patterson footage, or is there something you point to as a researcher that like this keeps me going just personally?
Well, I think the strongest evidence is probably some of the footprints that have been found over the years. Not only the casts themselves, which by all, we can say that these look like real casts, not, wooden stamps or what have you. They may dermal ridges, which are, be like fingerprints, and the circumstances of the cast, who found it, where was it found, that sort of thing. There's a number of those that, I've got some in my collection that just, I've even talked to the people who found them, and these could be law enforcement personnel. Those seem promising. The Patterson Gimlin film, well, it's great, but we're still debating it. So obviously it's not the ultimate proof. And then, it's just like he said, she said kind of stories. I know Bob Gimlin very well, and I stand behind whatever Bob says. If it's a hoax, he was hoaxed.
He's still sticking to it. So
yeah, absolutely. He's a very honest, straight shooting guy, and he never made any money off that film. He didn't get anything for it, so he had no reason to uphold some kind of story. And I've heard him tell it many times. But those things, I guess those things keep me on it, or just really what keeps me on it. It's just the phenomenon itself of people in our modern world saying they saw something that resembles this ancient hominid walking through the woods, and as well as these other creatures, because I like all the monsters of the woods, and these reptilian lizard men, sightings of river monsters, lake monsters, goat men, all this other stuff. It's just a cool thing to pursue, and the effects these have, like in the Legend of Boggy Creek, the effect that had on that town. If you go there now, this wasn't even, when I started the book, even it was kind of dying down, but if you go there now, there's a monster mart that has a giant Bigfoot coming over it. We've got a museum there with exhibits. There's a gift shop. There's boat tours and stuff. This town is just, and they really haven't tried. It's like in some cases, like, oh, we don't want to, trump this up, but it just is, and it's become part of the history of these towns, and it's just a cool phenomenon that people see monsters, and whether we prove them or not, it still makes a compelling story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like when you go to the Netherlands or Scotland, they take trolls very serious. Like they're as serious into trolls as we are Bigfoots. Have you ever thought about going over there and kind of hooking up with a troll hunter and see if you can see if there's similarities to our Squatches?
Well, yeah, I definitely would be down for that. And I've done a lot of touring over in Europe, and at times was able to jaunt off into these massive forests of Germany and Poland and other places.
And you hear about fairies and like very mythological kind of fantasy creatures.
I always associate Europe with werewolves and vampires.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we'd be on tour and drive by, and you see these. They were kind of like these little valleys, where there'd be these little houses, beautiful valleys and stuff, and then the houses and the smoke's coming out the smokestack. And I'm like, dude, at night, a werewolf's going to try to get in that house. Literally, what I thought, it looked just like that, like you say, had that almost like Hansel and Gretel vibe or something, like old world. And all of those sort of old world tales of trolls and fairies and werewolves and vampires, it's just like the modern representation of that with reports of dogmen and other things, which would be the same as werewolves, 300 years ago.
What do you think are the most credible? Like I think most people into it believe there is something that equals Bigfoot. But do you think the skinwalkers are real, or do you think what's the other one? The horned creature we talked to what's her name about? Wendigos, the Native American kind of cursed forest creature. Like which ones do you think are probably also real. Like if we think Bigfoots are real, we all agree with that. What are some of the other ones that you think
Credible.
are pretty credible?
Right. I mean, Bigfoot's at the top of the list. I think that it kind of adds up. It can very well
There's
fit
something there
into our world without too much conjecture. Then you going from there, you start going down. I think some of these lake monsters, lake creatures, there could be something behind that. There's a lot of water, and it's sometimes very hard to know what's down there. So, some of the Lake Champlain and other where you have these long history of sightings with some pretty credible people, there really could be something to that. The dogman phenomenon, I believe that people have seen something that seemed like an extraordinary canid that was hard. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a Bigfoot, that didn't fit into that. It could be possible. I see Wendigo and skinwalkers much more in the sense of like the Native Americans. These were spirit animals and creatures created to fill stories and to explain things and to explain the unknown and the horrors of the world they didn't understand. Because, I just don't get Wendigo sightings. I get all sorts of sightings of cryptids and things, chupacabras and, all kinds of stuff. It's very rarely do somebody report, Wendigos. The skinwalker thing, I mean, I'm no expert on Native American culture, so I don't want to say there's, I don't say there could be anything, but those again enter realms of religion and superstition and other things where Bigfoot does not have all that. Bigfoot is, got some early stories out of the early 1900s of guys seeing these man-like ape-looking things. That was it. They were not, they didn't have a backstory like the Jersey Devil. Jersey Devil has an origin story. 13th child, their mother leaves, and it ran off into the woods, and now people see it. It's like the origin stories typically, come from fairy tales and things. So there is I see those differences in Goatman's and Goatman's Bridge, a very urban legends. There was a Goatman at a bridge, Screaming Bridge down the street from us, and they're like ubiquitous to all towns. So while there could be things that we don't understand, and certainly if these things are coming from otherworldly places, then no holds barred. Who knows what all this could be? But, as far as just trying to rationalize cryptids in terms of, are these flesh and blood creatures? Is there something swimming in the loch? Is there something walking through the Pacific Northwest? Those are a little more grounded, I think.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know why you feel that Bigfoot hides so much. Like, I'm just curious to hear what your thoughts are as to why they don't want to be seen or why they only show themselves at particular times.
Well, I mean, I don't like people all that much sometimes myself. Or at least the bad ones, and we have some examples going on in our world right now. You know what I'm saying? That, but animals are reclusive like that, and it's just nature, and it could be their mechanism and the way they want to be to just avoid people or things like that. And if you set out, usually if you disrupt an animal's environment, that's when they will come out. But typically they try to stay hidden. If you go searching for wolverines or something like that, they're very hard to find because they are just living under the radar. That's what they like to do. And only if you disrupt their habitat, maybe you would see one outside of that. But if just left alone, it's their natural thing. Tigers and other things are very shadowy. They're, cougars, for example. Those things are super hard to see. You only see them every once in a while. I found a few prints, and I don't see them. That's how they live. And I think Bigfoot can be the same, where that's just their preferred way of living, and there's small numbers of them. So, that would explain why they're just, they're not running around everywhere.
I remember they've learned to not trust people in the past.
You have to assume that, these things have seen human activity, and whether they see us clearing forests and killing animals. That's what they see, So why would they want to have anything to do with us?
Absolutely. Just like, if they're remotely intelligent or observe any of this, then surely they would they would not want to interact with us whatsoever.
Yeah.
I don't blame them.
That's fair.
Well, one last question, sir. What is your favorite cryptid?
Well, that would have to be the Boggy Creek Monster.
Yay.
That's one near and dear to me, and it's been an honor to have become part of the legend, I guess, so to speak. It's something I never thought when I was a kid. I didn't even think, you could become a monster hunter. You could help bring back this movie, restore it, represent it on network television and stuff like that. So, it's just something that literally has changed my life, that creature. So I both am intrigued and I now love, just love that, the story and just everything about it.
So
thank you for saving it.
Something just came back to me earlier. I think before we went live, I had said I saw Boggy Creek on a double bill at the drive-in with frogs, but I realized that was the ad in the paper that I had seen. And then later when I actually saw the movie, it was a double bill with Creature from Black Lake.
Oh.
So,
yeah, Creature from Black Lake is another great.
And anyone who's a fan of Boggy Creek should see Creature from Black Lake if you haven't seen it.
Well, absolutely. And that was filmed south of there, about maybe 45 minutes south, in a place called Caddo Lake, which is between Texas and Louisiana. So, it's another one that was kind of came out of our area, and one of my other favorite Bigfoot films. Those
I've never seen that one.
Do they consider that to be based on real events, or is that totally fictionalized?
It was fictionalized as far as the script and the way they approached the movie. Unlike Boggy Creek, they weren't trying to reenact. However, the producer of the movie said that his inspiration was sightings of a man-like hairy creature in this place called Bayou Bodcaw, which is, again, located pretty close there in what I call the Sasquatch Triangle between Fouke and Bayou Bodcaw and Caddo Lake, where they filmed Bigfoot movies and had Bigfoot sightings. So it was sort of based on real stuff as well.
Wow. Just wow.
My favorite guilty pleasure Bigfoot movie is a little gem called Night of the Demon. I don't know if you're familiar with that one or not, but it's
yeah, that's a weird, crazy one. I'm pretty familiar because the new Blu-ray that was released by Severin Films that just came out, I'm on the bonus features doing a big old long interview. So yeah, I
do it out on Blu-ray.
Yeah, and it's a really cool. In fact, that Night of the Demon Blu-ray has the bonus features are almost worth it unto themselves, because they have interviews with Stephen Bissett, who is a cryptid film aficionado. He's the guy who drew Swamp Thing, and Bill Munns analyzes the Patterson Gimlin film, and then I do a whole thing on Bigfoot. Yeah. So it's very cool. Yeah.
What was that, Brian?
I have to look for that Blu-ray. I didn't realize it was out. I knew that it had started showing up on like Amazon Prime and stuff. I hadn't seen in 30 years at least.
Yeah, and they restored it pretty well. It looks good because that's like a Bigfoot really gone wild, like
it's a
gore.
total exploitation movie. There's
Totally, yeah.
but it's awesome.
It's a good one.
Well, I think that's our time. Lyle, thank you for gracing us with your presence and your knowledge of all things unexplained. And thank you for everything you've done to keep Boggy Creek in this world. And we promise we'll make Mandy watch it.
Thank you.
I'm sure you'll enjoy it, especially with the context you now know about it. So
Yes.
We'll have a Boggy Creek party, Mandy.
Looking forward to it.
We'll have a good time. All right, Lyle, we'll let you go.
all right,
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Appreciate
so much.
Very much.
all right.
Oh my gosh.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Wow. What
Very
an
cool.
amazing episode. What a knowledgeable guest. Mind is blown.
It's fun to talk about other things. Paranormal's great, but it's fun to kind of
Yeah.
delve off into something
Remind
different.
me in the future to share my one cryptid experience.
Oh. All right.
Okay.
I'm gonna get
Yes.
him to give us some more cryptid hunters we can talk to too.
That'd be cool.
Quickly to get it all out there, get your HPD t-shirts at our Teespring. Just go to our link tree and do all that. That's all I'm going to say tonight. Doesn't seem to be doing much. We need your help. Join our Patreon. Subscribe to all our shit. We love you, and we
Buy
do
some
this for
cool
you.
stuff.
And we got new stuff coming. Go watch that Kia Mill on Paraflix. For Crazy Mandy Maisie, for Brian Ray, I'm Steven Atkins, and say goodnight, Brian.